You know, we all think we know Caravaggio, the tortured genius, the street-brawling painter, the original bad boy of art history. But what if I told you that the rebel icon we all know and love is actually a pretty modern invention? I mean, right from the get-go, the stage was set. His very first biographers painted him as this infamous, scandalous figure who was way ahead of his time. And that's the myth that stuck, right? The story of a timeless rebel.
But is it really that simple? Well, today, we're going to peel back the layers of this myth and see how every generation has kind of reinvented Caravaggio to fit its own needs. And this isn't just about one painter. It's really about how we use the past to tell stories about ourselves. And our story really kicks off, maybe surprisingly, in the early 20th century. This is when Caravaggio was basically pulled out of centuries of relative obscurity and remade into a hero for a new, modern world. It's kind of wild to think about now, but for hundreds of years, Caravaggio just wasn't that big of a deal. But then along came art critics like Roger Fry. They were searching for a kind of spiritual ancestor for modern art, someone who broke the rules. And oh boy, did they find their man in Caravaggio.
For a guy like Roger Fry, Caravaggio wasn't just some Baroque painter. No, he was the first modern artist. He saw a revolutionary, someone who painted from the gut and told the establishment to get lost. This reframing was absolutely crucial. It really set the stage for everything that was about to happen.
But this modern makeover didn't stop with art critics. At the same time, you've got Freudian ideas just sweeping through the culture. So people started looking at Caravaggio's dark, violent paintings and his even darker, more violent life, and they saw the perfect psychological case study.
This new approach had a name: psychobiography. The whole idea, which was pioneered by Freud himself, was to basically put famous dead people on the therapist's couch. You analyze their art not just as art, but as a direct window into their subconscious.
So let's take one of his most famous and, frankly, most gruesome paintings. You see the severed head of Goliath? Well, that's actually a self-portrait of Caravaggio. So through this Freudian lens, the painting becomes a confession. It's seen as this unconscious admission of guilt for a murder he'd committed, and maybe even a subconscious desire to be punished for it. Just like that, Caravaggio the rebel becomes Caravaggio the tortured soul, a victim of his own inner demons.
So first, he's reborn as a modern artist, then as a psychological subject. Caravaggio's next big transformation? It was completely political, and it happened in the literal rubble of post-World War II Italy.
Okay, to really get this, you have to picture the scene. It's post-war Italy. The country's absolutely devastated after the war and the fall of Mussolini. You've got this new government, the Christian Democrats, trying to rebuild not just the cities, but a whole national identity. And at the same time, they're in a huge political battle against the growing influence of communism.
Which leads to this fascinating question. The royal palace in Milan was in ruins from bombing raids. And yet, they poured a ton of money and resources into rebuilding it for a massive exhibition on Caravaggio. Why? Why was this 400-year-old painter so important in 1951?
Well, the answer is all about the politics of art. See, Mussolini's fascist regime hated the Baroque style. They saw it as decadent, chaotic, and they literally demolished Baroque monuments. So for the new post-war government, embracing the Baroque and its most famous painter was a huge political statement. It was their way of reclaiming a part of Italian heritage that fascism had tried to wipe off the map. The man in charge of the exhibition, a politician named Achille Marazza, very deliberately spun Caravaggio as an artist of the people. His gritty, realistic paintings of saints and martyrs were presented as these perfect symbols of Catholic faith and resilience, which, was the perfect message for the Christian Democrats to use against their communist rivals. And all that messy stuff from his biography, the murder, the brawling, yeah, that got conveniently swept right under the rug.
But you can't keep a good bad boy story down forever, right? That sanitized version of Caravaggio definitely didn't last. By the 1980s, a whole new generation was ready to reinvent him all over again, this time as an icon of rebellion, sexuality, and postmodern cool.
A huge figure here was the filmmaker Derek Jarman. His 1986 movie Caravaggio basically took that pious artist of the people image and threw it in the trash. Jarman reimagined him as a queer punk rock hero. He saw a direct line between Caravaggio's struggles with authority and his own battles against the conservative government in Britain, turning the painter into a potent symbol for gay liberation and artistic freedom.
And that rebellious spirit wasn't just in movies, it completely took over the art world too.
A new group of painters, the Neo-Expressionists, were just sick and tired of the cold, sterile, minimalist art that had dominated the 70s. So they looked back to Caravaggio as their hero, as the inspiration to bring drama, raw emotion, and the human body roaring back into painting.
This all came to a head in a massive blockbuster exhibition at the Met in New York. And here's the kicker, remember how that 1951 Milan show basically hid his criminal record? Well, this show put it front and center. The murder, the arrests, the running from the law, it was all part of the main attraction. The bad boy was back, and people absolutely loved it.
Which brings us pretty much up to today, to the peak of what some people have called Caravaggio mania. It's a moment where our obsession with the man, the myth, and now the brand has just reached a total fever pitch.
Just look at these two monuments. They were built only 12 years apart, in the very town where Caravaggio died. One is this violent, abstract sculpture with a sword and a prison grate. The other is a totally classical tomb with a pretty basket of fruit on top. I mean, we can't even agree on what kind of statue to build for him. It just shows how torn we are. Was he the tormented rebel or the classical master?
And this obsession got, well, a little weird in 2010 with the supposed discovery of his bones. As the Met's Keith Christiansen put it so perfectly, it really felt like we were back in the Middle Ages, worshipping holy relics. It shows we're not just interested in his art anymore. We want an actual physical piece of the myth itself.
So after all this, you have to ask, who even was the real Caravaggio? But maybe that's the wrong question. We've seen him turned into a modern rebel, a psychological patient, a political football, a queer icon, and a pop star. Each one of those versions tells us way more about the time that created it than it does about the actual guy. So the real question is, what does our obsession with this violent, brilliant, and endlessly adaptable artist really say about us?